All right, guys. So this lecture module is going to be fairly short, so we can celebrate already because it's not going to be quite a bit of information, or it's not going to be in-depth lecture assignments that you're going to experience with this. And the reason is because we're really only talking about reference books in this laboratory module or the lecture module. The reference textbooks we normally have taken for granted because we use them all the time, and we sometimes forget that people who have never been in a laboratory or that have never stepped foot into a laboratory working environment have no clue about what these reference textbooks are. And actually, if you go to maybe a general intro chemistry course, you probably will not see those students either know about these reference books that we're getting ready to discuss. And it's just something that's never really mentioned for some reason in a chemistry lecture environment. So we're not going to take this for an advantage anymore or for granted anymore. And we're going to go through the proper steps of explaining what these reference textbooks are. So the very first one that I want to talk about is this reference textbook called the Merck, M-E-R-C-K, the Merck Index. And the Merck Index was actually made years and years and years ago, started at least by the Merck Pharmaceutical Company. And the Merck Pharmaceutical Company is one of those pharmaceutical companies that are a major workhorse, a major employer, and really one of the Fortune 500 companies that you might see people getting employed with. They do a very good job in the drug industry. They have some of the biggest name drugs that they manufacture and market. They employ thousands of people, and they have many different laboratory spaces scattered all across the world, not just in the United States and not just in North Carolina. The closest Merck to us currently is in the RTP area. So if you're interested in working for the pharmaceutical environment, if you're interested in maybe moving away from our area but still kind of staying a little bit close, then go to RTP. You're going to find major employers like Merck that's going to be there. And I think that you'll be able to find a job within a matter of weeks once you go. So the Merck Index right now currently sits at the 14th edition. And the reason that I say this is because it's not really updated every single year. There's only a certain amount of information that can go into a reference textbook, and there's years are going to go by before you have to update that reference textbook ever again. So the 14th edition, if you're interested in purchasing your own copy, it looks kind of like this. And there is a picture of the 14th edition of the Merck. And over to the side, you're going to see the price. And right now, this used Merck Index is going to be $35.85. So we're going to be using the Merck Index quite a bit. And I have to say that if you're thinking about making an investment in a textbook or a reference book, then this is the one to do, because not only will you need it for our courses later down the road, but it's a very good reference when you do get a job and when you start working in a laboratory field. It's one of those kind of encyclopedias that you must have at all times, okay? So the Merck Index, you can get brand new. You can order it straight from the website, and it's going to cost you around $300, give or take a little bit. So that's why I'm saying don't buy a new one, even if it's a new 14th edition. Always get a used one. You're going to find what you need in there. So what if it's opened, and so what if somebody else has turned the page on it. But for $35.85, I think it's going to be a very good investment for you in the future. So maybe not this semester, maybe not in this course, but at least consider about getting this reference book a little bit later on, especially for some of our second year classes that we offer in the program. So there's a picture of the Merck Index. Now, a little bit about the Merck Index. The 14th edition was published in around 2006. All right. And it's not really been updated that much since that time. And again, it doesn't need to be. All of the information's basically there. And even if a new edition did come out in the future, there's not going to be that much change associated with the Merck Index. The only thing that they really can do is add new compounds into the reference book, and that's about it. All right. You can also get the Merck Index in a CD form. So they do come in CD-ROM if you do not want a hardback textbook. And you can also get them in an online form as well. So you can just log into the website, you can type in a chemical name, and it will automatically pull up the information that you need. Some people like the online access. For me, though, I kind of am old school, and I like the actual hardback book in my hand because I've paid for it, and I want to see it, and I want to touch it, and I want to smell it, and I want to feel it, right? All right, so the Merck Index, on the inside, they have thousands of monographs, all right? And the monographs are what we're going to call the entries. I don't want to get you confused with the USP monographs that you've been doing in the class, though. The same word is used, but the monograph here is basically just an entry. So, for instance, if I look up aspirin, I can find aspirin in the Merck Index, and that entry for aspirin is going to be called the monograph for aspirin. There's no testing, though. It doesn't tell you what you need to do in a laboratory to test the product. It's just the entry of the product. What are some of the basic information that's out there that's known, physical and chemical properties that are associated with it? And that's really all that I get from the Merck, okay? So the Merck Index, a little bit of history, started about 100 years ago, and this was basically for Merck Pharmaceutical kind of at the time to go through and give them a reference book that was internal. Imagine working in a laboratory and trying to find physical and chemical data for products every day. And this was getting out of hand. So basically what they wanted was a system in place that allowed their laboratory workers to kind of go in and to assemble a reference book, where if they were working for a certain compound, they would just have to open the reference book up and everything is right there for them that they need for that particular test or background information or structure, whatever the case is. And this saved them a little bit of time. So over the course of years, they assembled this reference textbook in a way, and the textbook became thicker and thicker and thicker because they started to work with more and more compounds. And then one day, somebody wised up and said, well, why don't we sell this? Why don't we actually take this information that we've been compiling and assembling and actually bind it up and put it into a book and actually sell it to other people that would be interested in using it as well? So that was kind of the goal of the Merck Index. And not only was it scientific community, but it was also the medical community as well. So we actually see the book getting used in science, but we also see the book getting used with the medical environment too. And this made it even more powerful of a reference textbook to have. So the Merck Index has grown to be one of the world's most respected and best-selling text in chemistry, medicine, and even vet science now. So it is one of the best textbooks to have, or reference books, and it is also one of the most respected. So that's why we use it most often, because everything that we need probably is going to be in there in some form or some fashion. Right? The way that this book is written is that the monographs are entered in, and then once the monograph is entered in, we have a peer review process that goes through and it reads that entry to make sure that it's actually scientifically sound, and then if that entry gets approved, it will then go into the newest edition of the Merck when that gets printed. All right, so that's kind of the story with the Merck Index. Now, I want to show you some pages inside of the Merck and kind of show you what the Merck actually looks like if you don't have the textbook in front of you. So let me pull up a page in the Merck and I'll show you what we're talking about. Okay, so here's a page from the Merck itself. And this is the general template of all the Merck entries or the Merck monographs that you might see. And there's just a couple of pieces of information that you can get from the Merck. So here is acetaminophen. That's just a random kind of page that I flipped to. And I just scanned the page for you so that way you can take a look at it. And after the word acetaminophen, you basically see this big long name, N4-hydroxyphenyl acetamide 4'-hydroxyacid-anilide. So this is basically the prim and proper name for acetaminophen, but who wants to say all of that? That's a big long mess, right? So those names are coming from the IUPAC system and the rules for naming an organic molecule. And then it goes through and it gives me other names as well. P-hydroxyacid-anilide, P-acetaminophenol, P-acetaminophenol, P-acetylaminophenol, N-acetyl P-aminophenol, paracetamol, and then it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it gives me one name after another, after another, after another. And look, it goes all the way down through here, and it still gives me different names that the thing can go by. So one of the powerful things about Merck is that I can look up a compound name, and then it's going to tell me all of the other names that are associated with that compound as well. So here I have 30 different choices to basically label acetaminophen as. Not only that, but if I'm working with the compound and I have the IUPAC name or more of the common name associated with the compound, it's going to let me know what else is it going to be labeled and called as when I get out into the actual environment itself. All right? So after the naming and the nomenclature, it gives me some physical properties and chemical properties of the compound itself. So finally, they give me the actual formula here, CH89NO2, and then it gives me the formula weight, which is kind of important later on when we do these calculations. So 151.16. It gives me the elemental breakdown, so it looks like it's carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen because that's what's in the formula, right? And then they go through and do a percent composition calculation. So 63, 6, 9, and 21% makeup by weight. And that's how that compound is actually formed. And then it gives me a little bit of information. It looks like it's prepared from N or P-nitrophenol, and it gives me some references on where that came from if I want to look at how to maybe make it old school wise or some different options there are to make it out there. And that's what you're going to kind of see all the way down through here. So this is just how to make it, how to synthesize it. If I wanted to make acetaminophen in the laboratory, there's a couple of approved kind of true methods that are out there that I can feel really comfortable in, and that's one of them. All right, and those are some of the others. Finally, they give me the structure down here below. This is what acetaminophen structure looks like. Almost all entries, they provide you a structure for the compound. And then down below, they start giving me some observational physical data. Large monoclinic prisms from water. The melting point is 169 to 170.5. The density is 1.293. The UV max, if I dissolve it in ethanol, is 250 nanometer. I see this little E, which stands for molar absorptivity, 13,800. That will become important in our spectroscopy class. Very slightly soluble in cold water, considerably more soluble in hot water, soluble in methanol, ethanol, dimethylformamide, ethylene dichloride, acetone, ethyl acetate, slightly soluble in ether, practically insoluble in petroleum ether, pentane, and benzene. The LD50 in mice is milligram per kilogram, 338 orally, and 500 IP. Use, well, they can do it to make dyes, photographic chemicals. It's also an analgesic and an antipyretic. So it gives me some information that something like Wikipedia would. right? I mean, that's what this is going to boil down to. This was kind of our Wikipedia before Wikipedia existed. So it's a hardback reference textbook that gives me physical and chemical data from any compound that I can probably think of or work with in a laboratory. And that's why the Merck Index was so important and still is so important today. I'm going to tell you never to trust Wikipedia fully. And the reason is because anybody can go in there at any point in time and submit information. And it's got to go through a review process, but sometimes the review process does not count mistakes or does not catch them. So the Merck Index is going to be tried and true. And we would like for you to use the Merck Index whenever it's possible. All right. So a couple of things that I want to say here. The density here is typically given in form of a D. And it's also going to tell you the temperature at which the density was measured at. So that's going to be very important. Take a look at the temperatures on the density reads. So if you have to do a density of a particular substance in the laboratory, you want to make sure that you're doing it at the right temperature that's stated in the textbook itself. Okay. The little e or epsilon is molar absorptivity. That will come into play in our spectroscopy class, so don't really worry about that. The LD50, what is LD50? Well, LD50 basically means lethal dose. So 50 represents the population percentage. So I have a group of mice, and I give these mice acetaminophen. And I go to a point where 50% of the mice are killed, and that's called the lethal dose. So milligram per kilogram, 338 orally, right? So that means if I give this group of mice, let's say there's 100 of mice that I'm giving this acetaminophen to, and I give them 338 milligrams per kilogram of acetaminophen, I'm going to kill out 50 of them if there's 100 to start with. So that's what the LD50 is with some of these compounds that you might see. It's just some toxicity data is really all that it is. All right, so that's the structure for acetaminophen, some table data from the Merck about acetaminophen. Nothing really fancier than this. But this is an entry, and this is what we would call a monograph. A lot of times, if you look on the page, it looks like things are in alphabetical order, right? So acetaminophen up here, and then down here is another compound, and then over to the side are more compounds. But it looks like we're all working in the aceta ranges. Not every single time is it in alphabetical order like you might think it would be. So there's a different way that we find compounds in the Merck. We don't really go and look alphabetically most of the time. There's actually a more surefire way of looking up these compounds in the text. So in the next video, I'll scan another Merck page for you to look at. We'll talk a little bit about that entry, and then I'll show you what some of the index pages look like as well, because you'll be using those quite often.